June the 19th, 2014. My mother's memories of her mother. This is a picture of my grandmother, Momma Jackie, and on her right is my Aunt Carole, who I was named for, and on her left is my mother, Mary Barbara Jean Norris Stairs. Lively. When Momma Jackie, my mother's mother, died, my mother and her sister asked if each of us grandchildren would speak at her memorial service. There were some memories that came before us, or were seen from the different perspective of my mother, though, and are too precious to be forgotten. Here's what my mother, Mary Barbara Jean Norris Stairs, wrote. In 1940, Jacqueline Thompson married Floyd Norris, and they moved to California to help Floyd's father, who was building orange crates for pennies each. In January of 1941, she had their first daughter, Mary Barbara Jean, named after all her sisters and sister-in-law, and 11 months later, her second daughter, Carole, named after her favorite movie star, Carole Lombard. 7 years later, in 1949, the third daughter, Diana, was premature and died after 5 days. Mother always kept our hair in ringlets when we were young and had our grandmother sew beautiful clothes for us. Our mother is remembered for her hair always in place, beautiful jewelry, although just costume, and fine clothes, a lot of which were purchased at garage sales and flea markets. Mother was always a hard worker. During World War II, she worked at Delco Remy, lifting armatures which weighed about 15 to 20 pounds from conveyor to conveyor. She became quite strong and would be the entertainment at parties by arm wrestling the men. The strength was still apparent up to her last days. She would hold on to nurses' gloves and would not let go. They would have to slip their hands out of the gloves and leave them with her. She was also very athletic and was on the high school basketball team. When we were growing up, Mother and Daddy would play basketball, volleyball, softball, table tennis, jacks, and other sports with us. They both had many trophies for their bowling skills. Another good quality was that she was careful with money and would always put back a little into a savings account. Our first trip from Indiana to Florida was hosted by James Cope, president of Florida Christian College. Later, the name was changed to Florida College, where we stayed in a dorm room in order to keep our costs down. We all loved Florida and moved here shortly after that trip. The trip and the move were done with Mother's savings. She was generous with her finances in sending us to college and later helping other college students in the Florida College Adopt-a-Student program. Mother used to tell us about the time that she and her mother, Goldie, were in a boat crossing a deep creek. They had baby chicks with them that they were taking to sell to get grocery money. They lived in the Arkansas countryside and were very poor. The boat tipped over and everyone fell out. Mother did not know how to swim, but Goldie was concerned about the baby chicks and was gathering them up so they didn't drown, totally ignoring Mother, who learned to dog paddle that day, but she was always afraid of water from then on. Her fear of water did not stop her many years later, when her 3 small grandsons, Alan, Stacy, and Mike Krim, stepped into a hole in Lake Keystone where Mother and Daddy lived. She would sink to the bottom of the hole and push up with all her might and push the 3 boys closer and closer to the shore, taking a breath of air and then going back down into the dreaded water until all 3 were safe. My sister said that was the scariest time of her life while she watched from the shore. Mother assisted her sister, Barbara Huff, and her daughters in buying homes and cars, wanting us to have good, running, safe vehicles. A Cadillac once saved her life, so she knew how important the right car can be. In the 1980s, she was stopped at the stoplight at Waters and Northdale Mabry when a tractor-trailer rig driver, who claimed his brakes failed, plowed into the rear of her large Cadillac. The highway patrol said if not for the impact resistance of the metal on that vehicle, she would not have survived. She spent many days in the hospital with head injuries, which most likely contributed to her dementia in the final years. They were in Amway, reaching the ruby level, had their own furniture business, and invested in land in Florida, the Circle 8 in Pasco County, and North Carolina, the Econo Mountain Estates, and Blue Mist in Bryson City. Both of them were very good in sales. We were taught to be self-reliant and industrious. When we were young, we had to stand on stools to reach the sink, but we had to wash and dry all the dishes, iron the clothes, including the sheets and towels, but we never got burned, as she cautioned us on how to hold the iron safely. Her favorite saying was, "Work is fun." The one work she did not consider fun was picking cotton. She felt that was the hardest labor she ever had to do. I am blessed to have traveled with her to Arkansas, Missouri, Alaska, cruising the Mediterranean and visiting South Africa, which was our last trip, not counting the many trips to her beloved North Carolina log cabin. She was a good travel companion who loved God's creations. Signed, Barbara Jean. When I lost my husband, Don Lewis, in 1997, I discovered that our secretary, who I thought was my best girlfriend, had put about $600,000 of our property into her maiden name. At the time, we had several secretaries in the office who managed our real estate investment business. When I believed that they colluded to cover the transfer of wealth away from Don and I that had happened without my knowledge, I fired all of them and begged my mother, who was trying to put in 20 years at Gulf Control for her full pension, to come handle my finances. I'm good at finding deals, but had never balanced a checkbook, and trusting my staff had not been wise. I figured that my mother would be able to sort out the mess, and that later I would hire her some help. She did sort out the mess, and we were able to identify and reclaim the properties, tax certificates, and many other items that had been imperiled. She found hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of real estate that was in danger of being sold for unpaid taxes, and caught up the payments to the county so we didn't lose them. My mother dealt with the mountains of paperwork and bookkeeping that accompanied a 6-year conservatorship that came along with a missing person situation. She helped me sort out half of the estate to give to Don's children, even though he had cut them out of his will and wasn't speaking to them. I divided the estate by giving them the properties that I had not been responsible for acquiring, and even several that I did, so that they could manage them to their own liking during the conservatorship. The children liquidated everything they could, but I didn't oppose them doing so. For years, I had managed their mother's properties that she got in the divorce from Don, so that she continued to have an income and a nest egg. But the children wanted their money right away. I doubt that they managed their mother's affairs as carefully as I had. Now in here I talk about setting out half of the estate, which is what I had offered them. And I offered to do that if we could operate outside of the conservatorship, because the conservatorship was such a ghastly expensive way to deal with all of this. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to keep it in the conservatorship. So they did not end up with half of the estate as a result, because I had to pay so much in costs and the legal battles, not with them, that were in the conservatorship through the end of it. They also insisted that their money not be wasted on feeding big cats, and the court imposed a $150,000 a year budget for running the sanctuary. That came at a time when our annual budget was closer to $500,000, and now I wasn't allowed to use the money I was earning in our real estate business to feed the cats. We had been a nonprofit since 1995, but in 1997, our real estate business was still paying most of the sanctuary shortfall, so I had to learn how to raise money from the public. I was also trying desperately to spay and neuter the cats to stop the breeding, and trying to divide the cages so that males and females weren't together. All of this while trying to find my husband, who had wandered off one day and never returned. The one thing I didn't have to worry about was the real estate business. I still had to go out and find the deals and negotiate the sales, but once I paid for the property, my mother took care of everything else. She had my dad go out and fix them. She would clean them up. She would run the ads to rent them under a rent-to-own contract. She would show the properties, screen the buyers, handle the rental contracts, collect the rents, nag them for unpaid rents, evict those who didn't pay, convert those who did to deeds with mortgages back to us, and then continue to collect the mortgage payments and foreclose on those who didn't pay. During the conservatorship, the cash always ended up in the hands of the lawyers and the court-appointed co-conservator, so I would often have to donate the properties up to my approved level of $150,000 a year to the sanctuary. As a result, my mother ended up having to run 4 separate businesses: the sanctuary finances, my real estate business, the growing sanctuary real estate business, and the court-mandated Don Lewis entity, which would preserve his assets until his return or issuance of a death certificate. It was this Don Lewis part that, if we hadn't had to go through 5 years of a conservatorship, it would have been more like half of the money going to the kids than what they got. But this account ended up being completely depleted by the end because of all of the costs of the conservatorship. She had to manage all of these accounts with the utmost transparency so that the world could see there were no improprieties, which is how a business should be run, but was an added level of stress in the hostile environment of a conservatorship. She handled all of the taxes, both to the counties and on the businesses, and keeps the most amazing and accurate records you can imagine for both the real estate business and for the sanctuary. She handles the payroll for both. She makes sure we all turn in our receipts so she can match them against the credit card statements. She does all of the banking. She handles payment of all of the electric bills, water bills, maintenance, gift shop, cat food, and other vendors, and phone and internet services. I'm sure she does a lot more that I don't even know needs doing, but she does it so well that I never have to think about it. But for the last many years, she has been doing all of that all by herself while taking care of Momma Jackie, who hasn't been able to care for herself since losing her husband, my grandfather, Big Daddy, in November of 1997. Momma Jackie has been bedridden for the last several years, but my mother still managed to do all of this by herself, with occasional reprieves by her sister taking care of Momma Jackie. My mother never had any support staff until I hired Katie I can never say her name, she's my niece, Katie Nickich last year as her assistant. She had replaced 6 or so office workers and performed better than a dozen. She never asked for help until last year, and even then she was still doing it all, but she felt she needed to train the next generation to take her place when the time comes. I am so fortunate to have such a wonderful mother and business partner. And this is a picture of us with 5 generations. Left to right was Jacqueline Norris, Mary Stairs, Carole Murdoch. Seated was Goldie Massey, my grandmother's mother, holding Jamie Veronica Murdoch. And this picture was taken at 4911 West Liberty Street in Tampa, Florida.